Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started. I think almost all board members, there's Ms. Bounds. She is coming. We'll have a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Ms. Henderson.
Please face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Knox County Board of Education June 30th work session. Since many of our families and staff will be celebrating the July 4th holiday week, and as we approved in our 2021 annual calendar, the board's regular session meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July 14th, and it will begin at our regular 5 p.m. start time in the City County Main Assembly Boardroom. The board met in executive session with representatives from the Knox County Law Department this afternoon at 4 p.m. Mr. Dupler, would you mind explaining what executive session consists of, please?
Sure, be happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. Executive session is a time for attorneys from our office to consult with the board in an exception to the state's Open Meeting Act. It's been recognized by several cases, probably the biggest one being Smith County Education versus Anderson. We're able to discuss both pending litigation and anticipated litigation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Board members, also just a reminder that our next policy review meeting is scheduled for July 21st at 1:30 p.m. in the Andrew Johnson Building Boardroom. And are there any requested changes to this work session agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And now I would like to turn to the introduction of our 2021-22 student representative on the board this year. And I'd like to thank Ms. Satterfield for serving as the board's representative on the student representative selection committee this past spring, and to the entire committee for their service. As was announced at our May meeting, Raymond Jen, a rising senior at Farragut High School, was selected by the committee to serve for the 2021-22 school year. Since this work session is his first official meeting with us, I wanted to take just a moment to welcome him and share a little bit of information about Raymond. So this past year, Mr. Jen served as the Vice President of Competitions for Mu Alpha Theta, Secretary of the Junior State of America, the Treasurer of Model United Nations, and a Student Government Association representative. He is a member of the Science Club, a part of the Humanities Academy, and a member of the National Honor Society and the Health Occupations of America. A few of his honors include being a published author in the Journal of Public Health Research, earning first place for astronomy and second place for Codebusters in the 2021 Science Olympiad, and multiple other placements in the 2019 and 2020 Science Olympiad, MAO State Competition, Tennessee Science Bowl, and Mid-South Model United Nations, where he earned honorable mention as a delegate to the Disarmament and International Security Committee. Raymond is a paid assistant instructor at UNS Martial Arts Center and earned, I'm not sure how to pronounce these, a wonderful black belt. I couldn't even tell. You'll have to tell us in just a moment. You can pronounce this for me because I'm not even going to try. After only 8 years of practice. That sounds pretty impressive. He earned the highest superior ranking for 6 consecutive years for piano at the National Federation of Music Clubs Festival Program and advanced to the Tennessee Music Teacher Association Senior Piano Competition after receiving a superior ranking from the Knoxville Music Teacher Association. Raymond was also second chair for viola in the Advanced Blue Orchestra at the Junior Orchestra Clinic. A few of Raymond's activities include mentoring the Farragut Middle School Science Bowl and Science Olympiad teams for competitions, tutoring fellow students in multiple subjects, volunteering at school activities, helping with the Love Kitchen canned food drive, setting up a voter registration drive for seniors during the last election cycle, and writing letters of encouragement to support the elderly in nursing homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Raymond, we'd like to welcome you to the board, and we all look forward to serving with you over the upcoming year. Thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on all of your accomplishments thus far. We're happy you're here. Thank you. Would you like to pronounce the thing that I couldn't pronounce?
I'm not being sure of the, the exact naming of it. Essentially, it's just the third-degree black belt. So
Okay,
that'll do.
okay, I could say that, third degree
Yes, ma'am,
black
yes.
belt. That's not what it says on my paper, just so everybody knows. I could have pronounced that. Okay, thank you very much. And now I'd like to refer to Ms. Owen for our Vision and Mission Spotlight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we have just a few short slides. We had them, there we go. We're here. Okay. In talking about our mission and vision, our vision is to grow lifelong learners who contribute their talents, strengths, and skills to build a stronger community. And our mission is to provide excellent and accessible learning opportunities that empower all students to realize their full potential. The Teacher Supply Depot plays into that mission and vision. The depot is a collection center and warehouse of donated new and used classroom materials provided free of charge for teachers, teaching assistants, and other school personnel in Knox County schools. The depot is open to Knox County schools educators 4 times each school year, and it's located on Cedar Bluff Road behind Cedar Bluff Preschool, which is the former Cedar Bluff Intermediate Building. Since its beginning 20 years ago, many businesses and community members have donated materials, money, and time to the depot, allowing our educators to receive literally millions of dollars worth of materials and equipment for their classrooms, making the Teacher Supply Depot a very important part of filling a little bit of that gap between what is needed in our classrooms and what we're able to supply with our local funding. Many teachers remember the days when we could fill one green bucket with supplies at the Teacher Supply Depot. Teachers used to arrive before dawn and wait in line for hours to collect classroom supplies from the depot. In the early years, this was necessary because popular items like markers and pencils ran out quickly. Thanks to space provided by Knox County Schools and increased supplies provided by donors, the depot is now also open to teaching assistants and other support staff, and they're no longer limited to one green bucket of supplies. And I'm not sure if you can see it there, but she had a whole shopping cart full, and those shopping carts were also donated. Items are organized now. They are spread out and very easy to find. Pandemic protocols brought on additional adjustments, and as the depot board and staff worked hard to find ways to limit numbers inside the depot while still having well-attended openings, they also found ways to make sign-in and checkout go more smoothly. With increased supplies, more space, and the ability to have our teaching staff sign up for a shopping time, they've actually eliminated that long line and any reason for teachers to have to set an alarm for 4 a.m. on a Saturday to go and get just a bucket of supplies. So they now have lots and lots of supplies. People don't have to show up at the crack of dawn to hope to get anything because the supplies are there all day. They sign up for a time to go in. They don't have to stand out and wait in that long line. They have an assigned time for just so many people to shop. It's very organized, much easier, and The Depot Board is continuing to learn. That's part of their lifelong learning. They're continuing to learn from the process and find other ways and bring other things to teachers as well. And hopefully there are going to be some new processes also. In the fall, I'll update you with when those openings will actually be, because they're tentative dates right now, so I don't want to put those out and confuse people. So in the fall, I'll update you with the actual dates and let you know when you can come by and see that process happen, because it's pretty amazing.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. That's great that they've made some improvements so that teachers don't have to spend the entire day. That's fantastic to hear. Thank you very much. Okay, and now I'd like to refer to Mr. Thomas for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Several updates for you this evening. I'm very grateful for the tremendous efforts of our students, families, and employees during the school year that ended last month. Despite the enormous challenges of COVID-19, our school communities worked together to ensure that our educational mission continued to move forward. We are working very diligently to prepare for the 21-22 school year. I know the KCS community is eager to know more about what that will look like. As always, we will continue to consult with the Knox County Health Department and to review guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education and the Tennessee Department of Health. If circumstances related to COVID-19 change, we will respond promptly in coordination with these agencies. However, at this time, our expectation is the COVID-19 restrictions implemented a year ago will not be in place for the 21-22 school year. What does that mean? Specifically, that means that masks will not be required for students, teachers, employees, or visitors, although they may be allowed at each individual's discretion. Temperature checks will not be required for students, employees, or visitors. Knox County schools will not contact trace. Visitors will be allowed in schools, and extracurricular activities and field trips will be allowed. Please note that the KCS will continue to make use of Chromebooks provided to all K-12 students through the district's one-to-one initiative. In-person students should continue bringing their fully charged Chromebooks to class every day. Also wanted to point out that the district will receive approximately $114 million from the federal government through the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, also known as ESSER 3.0. We are encouraging families, students, employees, and other stakeholders to complete the online survey that can be found at knoxschools.org/ESSER. Again, that is knoxschools.org/ESSER. As of last night, we had more than 12,000 responses submitted to the survey. So I want to thank everyone who has participated. I think that's great, but there's still one more day. Tomorrow, the survey closes tomorrow, July 1st at 11:59 p.m. So I would encourage everyone who has not filled out the survey to do that for us. In addition, I was very pleased that the Tennessee Department of Education approved our request to operate 3 virtual schools in the 21-22 school year, one each for elementary, middle, and high school students. The deadline to apply for transfer to KCS Virtual School was May 14. Families who applied for a virtual transfer should have received already a letter from the district's transfer department regarding the status of their request. Also want to thank our virtual learning program principals, Jennifer Garrett and Leanne Hahn, for their leadership throughout this process. As you know, the July 4th holiday is coming up this weekend, and our offices will be closed on Monday, July 5th in observance of this holiday. I hope that our students, families, and employees take the opportunity to spend time with their friends and loved ones during the holiday. I do want to urge everyone to celebrate safely, however. And in closing, we look forward to seeing our students back in class for a half day on August the 9th. I know our students and staff are really excited about that, and if you're counting, it's 39 days from tomorrow. So the countdown has begun. So looking forward to seeing all of our students back in class on August 9th for a half day. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any questions or comments? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, I know I've seen you out and about getting some of the community feedback with the ESSER funds. How do you feel like that's going? And I noticed both meetings that I was at, the community meetings, we didn't really have much student representation. Are we hearing from students? Are students filling out the survey?
I am not sure on student participation. I know we had the family advisory participation. The survey's available for students. Would encourage students to fill out the survey, and we can get input that way, but I'm not sure if there was a formal John, do you know, was there a formal meeting for students, like we had on community meetings?
There's not a, no, sir, there's not a formal focus group meeting for that, but I do know that, and we don't have the results of the survey because it's still open, but from what we've heard from talking to our facilitators, that they're coming in probably about the same rate as parents as what we heard early on. So I think that they're choosing to use that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move into discussion of the agenda. Any questions on items and contracts 1 or 2? Ms. Henderson?
I don't really have a question for item 2, but I did want to say thank you to Mr. Oakes. Are we on the contracts there? For number 2, it's regarding the Pleasant Ridge community, and I did have some concerns about the land that would be taken from the school grounds there, and Mr. Oakes was very diligent, and thank you for your answers back. Some of the community was concerned about, would the school be compensated for some of the land that was lost, the traffic patterns, was it going to affect their parking? And the intent is for funds to go back to the school. Parking and traffic patterns will not be affected long-term. So just thank you to the staff for all the hard work they do in answering our questions and the concerns of the community.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Okay. Item 3. Any questions on that? I'll just say that I've heard from some community members who are concerned about just the language of being termed the medical director. So I was curious as to whether board members felt like we needed any additional language that specified that this is an advisory role only with power outside of a normal day-to-day operations that would have to come before the board. So I've heard from some parents who had a concern, so I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that. Ms. Henderson?
I've heard from parents as well with the same concerns, and so I had the same question as you actually. And I think if anything, we've seen in the past year that we've relied on 1 or 2 voices, and I'd like to see the scope broaden a little bit. And, in here it says consultation, and I'd like to stress that word consultation in the document as well.
Ms. Satterfield?
I have not heard from parents. I'm curious as to what the larger implications of the title being medical director, and also what other suggestions are there.
I asked specifically, the parents that I heard from, I asked specifically what part of this, because I think for the most part, this is a job description that specifies what is actually happening. So the concern that I heard was really around the term being used as medical director. And so that's at the very top of the document, and then also later on, it says, by signing below, the parties agree to this scope of services for the medical director for Knox County Schools. So I think their concern was whether that provides additional oversight that hasn't been there in the past, is the way I understand the question.
So the title?
That's the feedback that I got.
What is the alternative to the title instead of
Yeah, I'm bringing the question, and so that's why I wasn't necessarily asking board members about changing that. My thought was perhaps I'm assuming that we would need to see if the health department is agreeable, but to just adding language that that makes specific reference to the fact that this is an advisory role. So that's kind of where my thoughts were. I think Ms. Bounds, and then Mr. Watson, and then Ms. Babb.
Yes, my question would be, I don't know, for Bob or maybe Gary, to kind of fill me in. I don't know if I missed something about how this has come about, why Dr. Buchanan feels this is necessary, and exactly, I understand, maybe, I hope I did, the need to sign off for the nurses or the nurses working under someone, just as a nurse practitioner would work under a physician. But can somebody give me the history of this and why at this time we have this document that we're reviewing.
Mr. Dupler, would you like to take that?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bounds. So I'm not going to pretend to speak for Dr. Buchanan, but what I can say is that Dr. Buchanan and her office sent this over to formalize a relationship that has existed for numerous years, but it's not been formalized before. I think, and again, I hate to suppose, but I mean, but part of the conversation was, you know, with all the confusion that has gone about with COVID, felt like that it was a good time to again formalize what's already been happening. And if you look at the Tennessee law states that that a physician should be overseeing nurses in this type of capacity to simply to allow the nurses to practice nursing, so legally. So I mean that's really the purpose of her involvement, and it's my understanding that the health department has been involved for many years, even before Dr. Buchanan. So and we reviewed the language, and we felt like, again, it says consultation throughout. It says it, you know, advise. So I mean, it reads more like a job description, and it's certainly not overstepping in that bound. So
Thank you,
that's
Mr.
what
Dupler.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was part of my question. I was asking if this was something that got approved annually, but it sounds like it's a new document. I know when I read the term medical director, I never had a parent reach out to me about it, but it was a little confusing in terms of what was intended. And it's referenced in here that state law says that state law nurses may practice under protocols approved by an MD or DO. So because it's referenced that way in state law, is that one of the reasons why it needs to be titled in a certain way?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Watson. There are several statutes that come into play, but one of them specifically, TCA 63-7-108, actually uses the term "the physician directs the nurses." So I mean, that's likely where the term director came from. I can't say for sure, but I can tell you that term does appear in the statute.
Sure, but we're not limited to medical director for the purpose of the statute. It could be something else and still suffice?
Not that I'm aware of. Again, I think it was mentioned, we may want to talk to Dr. Buchanan about that, but not that I'm aware of right now.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, I got one email about it. But to me, and maybe, I know the nurses work under, I think, is it Jason, is it under you? To me, this does just seem like probably a document that does need to be in effect of the fact that I would think we do need some kind of medical authority that, you know, I look at some of these things like the AD and just some of these things that are very general that are medical things. So, I mean, I didn't know if you could sort of talk to, like, do we feel like we need some kind of medical person above it, or maybe there's actually the state law that kind of requires it? I mean, I personally couldn't really figure out what the problem was and why I had the concerned email, because I personally didn't have a problem with this, but.
Mr. Myers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the conversation about formalizing this relationship with Dr. Buchanan actually pre-existed COVID. It was one of the first conversations I actually had with Dr. Buchanan, was that we really needed to sort of formalize what this looked like. And part of that is I guess where it really turned its head was we had an air quality alert in Knox County, and I had been on the job for about a week and a half, and somebody said, call Dr. Buchanan and see if she thinks kids should be on the playground. And so I call her, and she was like, who are you again? But essentially, her position on that was, and I know that, you know, COVID changed the way that people perceive a lot of the work being done with our health department. I recognize that. But her response was, nice to meet you, Mr. Myers, but that's your decision. That's the school system's decision, not the health department's decision. So she has always taken the position that it is consultative, right? So the experience that we've had with COVID-19 is very much an outlier. And what Mr. Dupler says regarding the title of medical director, As far as I can tell, that's just the title that one has when they do this. So for example, if a nursing home doesn't have an in-house MD, the person that they contact with has the title medical director. So that's the person who gives, under the state legislation, that's the person who gives the nurses the authority to act with autonomy within the school building to deliver medical care to students. So I know that the timing of this coming to the board feels very connected to COVID-19, but the fact is the conversation around this, formalizing this and making it a bit more clear predated COVID. I think that she saw my entry into this role as, you know, as an opportunity to say, hey, this person has no pre-existing, you know, like we need to make it clear for both parties how this relationship is supposed to, how it's supposed to function. So, you know, the only real concrete things in there is how they support our AED program. The other things are purely consultative, and then her authority giving the nurses the ability to do their work.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ms. Bounds?
Oh, yes. And I appreciate that, Jason, because, and I thank you for acknowledging that it's kind of coming on the heels of post-COVID, which kind of makes people look at it a little bit differently based on Dr. Buchanan's past performance over the last year and some people who found it less than favorable. So I appreciate that. And I assume this is a position that's not compensated, so we would have trouble finding someone to serve over all the nurses in Knox County if it was not Dr. Buchanan, who is already in position as the head of the health department, and thereby she can do this, and we don't have to hire a physician to oversee or whatever.
Yes, that's correct. She's yes.
Ms. Christie?
I guess my question, Mr. Myers, is outside of COVID. I think it's probably also important to point out there are other illnesses that we deal with, like in the instance that someone might have meningitis, and we have staff and student exposures, and that might require, you know, a prescription or medication to prevent that, and they might not have the healthcare provider to go to. And this isn't just students. I'm assuming this goes for staff as well.
Yeah. So, I think that's a good point. And again, you know, as Mr. Thomas said in his update, you know, as we transition to a new school year, I think the goal for the Knox County Schools is to, you know, safely move forward in a more standard means of operation. And what you described with other illnesses is very much the way that our partnership with the health department has traditionally worked. And I think it's important for us to recognize that's the direction that we're trying to move. We're trying to get back to that, and that's why that relationship with the health department is so important, because you start talking about rare illnesses such as meningitis and those things. You know, that partnership with them is what allows us to know that we've got it. It's in our school. It helps guide our response. You know, we made some changes in terms of contact tracing with nurses and things inside our buildings that we had never done before, right? And we're trying to get back to where a more standard means of operation, and what you described is pretty spot on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Myers. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Okay, moving to items 4 or 5, 6 or 7, 8 or 9, 10 or 11, 12 or 13, and then the last 3, 14, 15, 16. Any questions on those? Okay. Moving to grants, questions on A or B, C or D, E, F, or G. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On E, just a technical issue. Ms. Coatney, I'm pretty sure that the wrong fiscal note is attached online to that one, on E. It references a fiscal note that's not associated with that. And then also I have a question about the grant itself. It's for 21-22, but all the background information dates back to 2019. Do we know if the program has changed since 2019 when that documentation was created?
Dr. Reiswick, do you have any information on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm making sure I'm on the right one. Are we E, is that the one the question's about?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was catching up quick, we were moving through. It's a continuation of the program that provides tutoring after school, so that there haven't been major changes to that. This is 21st century grant dollars that provide, tutoring at those schools for students after school.
So the thing that was confusing to me is because we had language that was dated back from 2019. This was not a grant that was originally filed in 2019. That's just the most recent documentation associated with this grant. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have various grants like this, and
Right.
they come due at different times for different schools. So every few years these come through, and this is just this set of schools for this given year. So I think it's just a kind of a formatted contract is basically the same, just provided at different schools, and they run out at different times.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving to contracts. Any questions on A? Questions on B? Ms. Babb?
Yes, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about this, since it seems like it's benchmark assessments and it's more customized. I mean, just what it's going to do versus what we've already been using. I just would love a little bit more information.
Dr. Reiswick, would you like to address that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Babb. So this is a couple things with this. We're actually pretty excited about this, and conversation with principals we are as well. So as you all know, the data source we typically get is the end of the year data that we get through students who are taking the TCAPS or the TN Ready tests. We haven't had much to do as far as getting kind of real-time data for students. Case 21 is a assessment that we learned about actually a couple years ago. Maryville City's used it, Germantown's used it, some other districts like that started out that were really using it to look at their ACT scores. It's basically a quick 30-minute to 45-minute, 3 times a year digital assessment that looks and aligns very tightly with proficiency standards at the state, and then also aligns very closely with ACT predictions. Again, in talking to our principals, we're excited. We haven't had a tool like this in a while that we can actually see how kids are performing. So there's no tie to evaluation, no tie to any of those sorts of things. The idea would be that we can kind of see this is where students should be. The database for Case 21 is pretty robust, so it can kind of predict where students are and where they fall. And that information is turned around, I think it's 72 hours. It gets turned back around to the teacher so that they have that to be able to focus kind of their reteaching on that. Another thing that we'll be using this for is part of ESSER does have a monitoring requirement that the strategies we put into that are actually working, and we have proof of that, or they're not working and we can modify from that. So one of our plans is to use that as well to be able to track kind of district-wide and pull that up and see how we're doing on the learning loss and closing those gaps.
What grades are able to be assessed with this?
So we actually have this written in for K-12. This initial one is the K-8, and then they also have high school versions too. So that's our hope to potentially, if that's what the input shows a need for that we could write that into our 9-12 as well and give us prediction for that. It's again, just in some early conversations with principals around it, a lot have been asking for this so that we can kind of know prior to that. So they're pretty excited about it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Reiswick. Any other questions on that? Okay. Moving to our regular agenda items. Any questions on A? Ms. Satterfield?
Thank you. Superintendent, or maybe Scott, I'm not sure who this will go to, but I like this, this plan in place, and I'm just curious, how did we come up with the numbers in the formula? Is it based in like examples from different districts, or just kind of works specifically here for Knox County? Like, what's the evidence behind, like, this is what we should do?
Yeah, now, probably Scott can address that a little bit better, but again, just looking at at our situation in particular, because every district will turn in something maybe different, that we don't see those. I guess we could ask to see them, but this is just based on Knox County and what we're doing in terms of a differentiated plan. The state asks for this every year for us to, the board approve it, and I don't know, Scott, if you got anything else to add to that?
Sure, it's basically based on historical data. We get a projection of what the needs are. We do have to reflect out what we paid in previous fiscal year, so that kind of gives us a number. If you look at it compared to last year, you'll see a change in how those things, those numbers may change from one year to the next. But it's a little historical data that we report out, and things that we try to project out based on his trends in Knox County.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, I'm not going to ask you all the questions that I asked before on this, but can you speak a little bit anecdotally to some of the benefit of a differentiated plan? Just take an example or two about what some of the things it's done for us at Knox County Schools.
Absolutely. You know, as you know, when you look at us, the competition in school districts that surround us, we're looking at places that are able to compensate at higher levels. Now, those are typically smaller municipal districts that do that. What this does is this allows us a competitive edge over some of those districts, along with some districts in close proximity to us. We provide a signing bonus, and just anecdotally speaking, a few years ago, as a matter of fact, it was in 2019, we kind of separated out as a pilot program, a special education kind of incentive program, where we increased it from $5,000 to $7,500 paid out over 3 years, or $7,000 paid out over 3 years. We have seen a great amount of success in that program, in a sense that finding special ed teachers are no longer as difficult as it once was. That may be attributed to this. That may also be attributed to the fact that in this year we started the Aspiring Teachers Program with UTK as part of that MOU, so we automatically had 11 candidates to fill. Given these opportunities, it allows for us to even staff strategically those schools that are more difficult to staff.
I appreciate you bringing up the special ed example. I was on a national call today with Georgetown Ed Finance, and one of the things that they were talking about is across the country we're having a hard time staffing, especially right now, special ed. What are you seeing related to the new positions that we just approved in the budget? Because we approved a lot of new special ed positions. Are we having a hard time filling those?
Actually, by my numbers and speaking with the special ed department, I think we're in better shape than we have been in some time, even given the fact that we are increasing the number of SPED teaching positions above what we've had in the past.
Thank you. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, my question's probably a little bit out of this, but since we're bugging Mr. Bolton, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And it's kind of piggybacking on this. We did expand to our ability to hire like social workers and behavioral people, I felt, and counselors, and I was just wondering, because my big concern was, do we have the people out there to actually fill the positions? So I was just trying to see from your standpoint how we feel like we're doing.
Again, there's a nationwide shortage in those positions, but I feel like this gives us a leg up. There's a lot of districts, again, that surround us that are competing for the same candidate pool, that it gives us the edge in getting those positions. Now, we do have an increase in counseling positions and things like that, and I think that is an area of need. I think this helps us with that. I don't think it's a perfect remedy, but it gets us closer to solving those vacancies.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions on that one? Okay, moving to item B. Any questions? Mr. Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Superintendent, I appreciate your and your team's work engaging with Mayor Kincannon and Chief Thomas and their team to keep KPD at the table with us at KCS. Can you just outline briefly kind of the steps that were taken to get to this MOA, this draft MOA?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Watson. In terms of getting to where we are today, obviously we talked about this a little bit, but we had 2 meetings with the mayor, our team and the mayor's team. First meeting I think we had on June the 3rd, I guess, and what we tried to do at that meeting was to explain to Mayor Kincannon a lot of things in terms of how SSOs and SROs interact and what SROs can do that maybe SSOs can't do, and then vice versa. So, a very good meeting. Mayor asked us quite a few questions, but it was a productive meeting. And once we left that meeting, we had a meeting on June 15th with the mayor and her team and our team. And at that meeting, as the mayor had basically listened to what we had to say and looked at the agreement. I know she indicated that she had looked at board workshop meetings and board meetings and put together the MOA that's in front of you today, made a few changes that we talked about. Some of the changes in there we're doing in the first place, so it just helps to maybe to formalize, document those actions that are being taken. Once we left that meeting, then Mr. Dupler, the city law department was represented in that meeting as well. So once we left that meeting, we asked Mr. Dupler to contact the city law department, which he did, and got a draft of the MOA. At that point, we sat down with our team, went through with Mr. Dupler and our team, went through the MOA, the changes, talked about those changes, and actually, Mr. Dupler, I think, then emailed the city law department with some changes that we recommended. Some of those changes, revisions were adopted, some were not, but basically we can live with everything that's in this document. And the main objective for me was to have something in place so that our schools, our cities, former city schools, or schools within the city limits of Knoxville had school resource officers in those schools. So I can't thank Mayor Kincannon enough for her willingness to meet with us and to listen to us and to come back with an agreement that allowed that to happen. So I certainly want to reach out to her and to her team for their willingness to work with us and put together this MOA that will allow the officers to be back in our schools when school starts.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I know that Chief Paducas was a part of some of those conversations, and I'm going to not pronounce his last name right, so I'm going to say incoming Chief Jason. Has he been able to weigh in on this? I know he's not starting till August 1st, but just curious if he's
right
able
and
to reflect on it.
Yeah, I had a little trouble with the name too, but very simply state Perryard, just like it spells and
Right.
sounds. So Chief Perryard, he actually, or incoming chief, yes, Chief Paducas was in both meetings, and fortunately, incoming Chief Perryard was in town in Knoxville for a couple of days and was able to join us in the second meeting with the mayor and Chief Perryard, or incoming Chief Perryard, I should say, is met with Chief Thomas, also met with the sheriff, to make those introductions and to let him know, make those relationships to get started on those relationships. So he has not officially or formally been involved, other than he was at that second meeting when Mayor Kincannon actually took us through the steps. He officially starts on August 1, I believe. So whether or not he's I feel sure he's probably looking at this. I know he's got some ideas about a couple of things that, the de-escalation, in terms of looking at that de-escalation in situations. Also, communication protocols. If more than one law enforcement department is out of sight, what are those communication protocols going to look like? Who's going to be in charge? Just some things that I think are going to be some improvements to the MOA from our side and also with our law enforcement partners. So,
Thank you, Superintendent. I do have a few more questions, but I'll defer to Ms. Babb.
Okay, Ms. Babb?
Yeah, I unfortunately cannot be here on the voting meeting for this, but I am very happy that we have been able to work with the city to get something in place, because I literally, when I go out in public, get stopped by people very concerned about the fact that they didn't feel we might have security coming for the fall. So I am really happy at this point that we're going to be able to get something in place, I hope, if we vote on this. But I can't vote on it, but I am very much in favor of it.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. And if I just real quick before we go back to Mr. Watson, one concern I had is just the way this sounds on page 4, under School Security Division and School Security Officer Duties. Number 6 says SSOs, so our school security officers will receive the equivalent of 40 hours of the school resource officer training course. To me, that makes it sound like that our officers are having a week's worth of training and that's it. So I know that is not true. Our officers go through a 9 to 10 week academy. They have additional training every year of 60 hours. They have another 18 hours of unscheduled service training. So that just, that's just a kind of a concern to me, that it just makes it sound like our officers don't have the type of training they do. So that's kind of a comment, but back to you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Mr. Dupler, can you speak to any potential challenges with having two different MOAs, one that informs our work with KCSO and one that informs our work with KPD?
Go ahead, Mr. Dupler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Watson. I don't know that I can speak greatly to it. I mean, ideally, we would have one agreement, but it's also my understanding that if you've got, a school within the city limits, they'll be operating under, this proposed MOU if it passes, or MOA. And then if you've got a school outside the city limits, then they would be operating under the existing MOA. So, all I can say is that, if the board wants to accept this particular proposed MOA, it is in legal form. It's up to the board as to whether or not you feel like that the school system can handle it and, handle the differences and the policies within.
Yeah. So I know there's not many changes from the original MOA that we have. Could you briefly highlight just the changes for the public and the board, because there's not many in terms of what those changes are?
Yes, I can try. Of course, initially it talks about the fact that, this is only with the Knoxville Police Department and the city and the school system. So I had some discussion with Ron Mills with the city law department about the jurisdictional authority, and we felt like that was resolved, certainly appropriately, and to everybody's satisfaction. And then there was some differences with regard to
Special education was one.
But yeah, special education is definitely one. There was another one before that, though, talking about. Hang on a second. I'm sorry. Principals. Yeah, it's under principals' duties. Talking about in number 7 under principals' duties, talking about minor property crimes. That's a slight change from the existing MOA, because the existing MOA talks about vandalism and simple assault. I think I don't want to suppose anything. This language came from the city, and they felt like that was appropriate language. So, but you asked for a change, and that was a change. They also added the language in that same section talking about, proper course of action on a case-by-case basis and the need to correct the student's behavior in the least intrusive way while following state law. So that was language that they wanted in there. And then probably the biggest change, well, there's two more probably significant changes. There might have been, a word or two here, but here and there. But on page 5, under Knoxville Police Department duties and responsibilities, under 7, as you mentioned, it talked about special needs students, and that originally that was all their language that they had proposed. That was a new section from the prior MOA, and then our office and Superintendent Thomas and his team asked for some additional language, which they did agree to put in there, talking about others in imminent danger of significant injury or loss of life. So that was added at our request, and then in the conclusion, the first part of that paragraph was language that was proposed, by the city, and that's new language as well.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. I just think it's important for the public to understand where those changes came from, that this is not a brand-new document that, I would think that they started with the MOA that they were pulling out of, and that there were some changes that were suggested. I think there's some difficulty for parents when there's two separate MOAs. I can easily envision a parent with a school or a kid in a city school and a kid in the county school at the same time, and potentially both with special needs. And how is this kid going to interact versus this kid? I can also see where when kids are moving across grade bands and they might be in a zoned school that's in the county, and now they're shifting to the city. So I think for the purpose of for the parents in the community to have one operating agreement seems to be the ideal long-term. The only people the people that spoke out and reached out to me when they saw this on the agenda, the feeling was, so does this mean that Knox County Schools doesn't want to hear from the community? I mean, that's a lot of what our conversation has been over the last 2 months related to this issue, is trying to hear from the community. I know I wasn't able to be at the board meeting on the 6th or whenever that was, but I did get to watch it, and I know that the board approved not hiring a third-party facilitator, but I don't think the board in that meeting, from my understanding, did not say that it didn't want to hear from the community. So I guess what I'm asking, and I guess I'm asking it of you, Superintendent, because I know that you and your team kind of took the lead on drafting this, which again, or not drafting it, but working with the city to get to an agreement, which I appreciate. Is the intent that this, if approved, kind of shuts the door on our agreements with law enforcement for this season until the next time it comes up? Or is the intent that we would still want to hear from the community on issues related to school safety and security in this MOA?
Good question. I've been waiting on an answer to that question for a while. Like I've said, I'm open to review. I'm open to listening. I know that several groups have expressed an interest in having some input. I don't know how you start that process without going to the community with a document and saying, here's what it is. So what's important in terms of changes that you want to make to it? We cannot tell law enforcement what to do. I mean, that's just simple as that. I mean, a crime's committed, whether it's on your property or my property or anybody else's property, law enforcement is going to do what law enforcement's going to do. I don't know. Y'all, again, when we had this conversation on May 19th, the suggestion was made, hey, hire a facilitator and do, which I thought was good suggestion, because somebody that's trained in facilitating something like that and being objective in it obviously is better than us doing it. But we will do whatever you want us to do. I think community input is important on it, so I'm open to that. But if board members say, hey, we got an MOA and we want to move forward, then fine. But we've got a new chief coming in. We've got a new mayor. New mayor's already weighed in on it some. I just had a very brief conversation with the sheriff about it. He's open to looking at the MOA, and if we can make any improvements there, I feel like he would be receptive to that. One thing he told me he did not want is somebody coming in here telling him how to enforce the law in Knox County. So he said, that's a job I've been elected to do, and that's what I'm going to do. But that's not to say he would not be open to looking at the MOA and making some changes if it improves it. It's, to me, it's all about getting better every day at what you do. So this document's been in place for a while. I think it's worked. We've had some issues, and I think when we've looked at the issues, we've tried to make some corrections there. But I'm certainly open and receptive, and our team is to looking at it in more in depth. But I think if we're going to involve the community, I think you have to have something to take to the community to say, yeah, here's what it is. What are your objections with it? To get that input. So again, I'm just a little bit frustrated, at this point. So, not to the point where I won't do what you tell me to do. Obviously, I'll do that, but just give us some direction and let us move on. You know, we're trying to open school, hire principals, get kids back in, hire teachers, and a whole lot of things that are very important to increasing student achievement, eliminating disparities, and building a positive culture. So we've spent just a huge amount of time on this, and you know, I'm ready to move on. Whether that's get the community input or, hey, this is a document and let's go with it. Now, probably said a whole lot more than anybody wanted me to say, but you asked, and that's my feeling, so thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Do you have another question, Mr. Watson? Okay, Ms. Bounds?
Oh, I was just going to express my appreciation and thank you and your staff for the willingness to meet with the city and to put forth an effort with this MOA to have it in place prior to school starting. As I think, Ms. Babb, were you the one that commented about the public being concerned from the officers being pulled from the schools? I personally don't see a problem with two different MOAs. These are two different organizations. I think it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. I think it's easier sometimes to, rather than trying to get everybody to agree at the table, it's easier to work individually with different law enforcement agencies. So I don't see a problem as far as two different ones. We can continue to tweak this as we go forward, but I'm just very thankful that we did maybe I should choose my words better, but make a mountain out of a molehill. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. I think Ms. Christie was next.
I would just like to say that any conversation that we have, I feel like our new security chief needs to be involved in. I think that these are the conversations that, you know, he's the one that has to establish his working relationship with our outside law enforcement agencies. And, you know, he might have other ideas about it. And maybe this is something that he can work on and discuss with them. When you say you would like to have a document to take to the community, you know, is that something we could ask him to do when he comes on board?
Thank you, Ms. Christie. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, I don't really necessarily have much about the MOA. I do wish we had community input, but I understand taking something to the community. But I'm highly offended by you, Superintendent Thomas, and Board Member Babb saying this is a mountain over, or whatever, how much time we spent on this. Because what I saw was an officer go into a school, manhunt a kid, and kill a kid in the bathroom. That's what I saw. And so if we need, however amount of time we need to spend to make sure that never happens again, that's how much time we need to spend on it. But that's what I saw. I saw an officer of KPD come into a school, did not give any notice to the principal or whatever it may be, and they killed a kid in our schools. So we should spend as much time as possible to make sure we never have that happen again.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Mr. Watson?
Thank you. Again, Madam Chair, I do think the comment around time, and Superintendent Thomas, you and I have talked a lot about this. I get your frustration. I mean, from what I talked to you about, it's more about not clarity about which direction to move. I mean, we all know how much time we spent on some other issues over this past year. And so, you know, we certainly have not spent as much time on this issue as some of the other pervasive issues that this board has dealt with. I spoke to Mayor Kincannon, and I just wanted to be clear that from my understanding from her, and Superintendent, you may have a different feel, but I don't know that she's opposed to continued engagement around the community. I mean, she said, I'm open to a continued community engagement process. I started this conversation back in May, I think it was, and Superintendent, you know this. I mean, not from me or anybody else on this board was this an attempt, who has supported this, as an attempt to tell law enforcement what to do. I mean, that's not been the driving perception. And I know certain folks in law enforcement, you know, get antsy when they feel like people are trying to do that. That's not what this has been about. This has been about, these are our community's kids, and our community should have an opportunity to weigh into the agreements that we have with local law enforcement. It's as simple as that. That's what this has been about. And so, again, I appreciate the work to get to this place with KPD. I appreciate the changes. I really value the change around special ed, special needs students, having one myself and imagining how he's going to interact potentially with law enforcement in the future. But I do think that if there's not an opportunity to hear from the community in some regard, it's one more. There were several, actually, in the meeting that I wasn't at. Again, I listened to it. There were several comments that were made about, I think it was you, Ms. Babb. You talked about how the community sometimes doesn't trust KCS. You even made the comment, you said, I trust KCS, but some in the community do not. It's because of situations like this, when we say out of one side of our mouth, we want to invite the community to the table, and then at the other end, we actually don't act on that. We actually don't do it. That's a really good way to hurt the perception of the community that you really want to hear from them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Bounds?
I just wanted to apologize to my colleague, Ms. Satterfield, and my words were probably not the best choice, Ms. Satterfield. And my point to all of this, and I think this has been a good discussion, and my point to it was I'm glad we have something in place going into, I think you said earlier, 39 days away from school starting. So I'm glad that, KPD and the KCS was able to get something in place. I agree with my colleague, Ms. Christie. I think it's highly important with us taking a new direction with Chief Padusa's leaving, that we get input from the new person coming in. And not that I'm opposed to not continuing this discussion, but I do agree with what you said. It's helpful to have something in place. It's helpful to have a starting point and to work from there. And we can get better. But anyway, I just wanted you to understand that my choice of words were probably wrong. It was more to the point that we've got something going into August in place. Could it be better? Maybe, but we can work on it to do that as we go forward with a new chief and with community input, if that's what we need. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that I didn't mean to minimize the incident. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, just kind of addressing all this, I am happy we have got this in place right now just to start school, because I think that was just a huge concern over the summer. Starting school, I think we've got something to move forward. I do, several people have talked about it, but I do think with a new chief coming in, I do want his input, but I do want community input, and I think we kind of have all talked different things. I did like the facilitator idea. I just went to the 2 ESSER meetings. It was kind of neat to see how these facilitators got conversation going that I really got a lot out of listening to that. But as a board, we've decided not to go in that direction, and that's fine. I mean, I support that we as a board are going to move on to a different way. But I think once we get school going, we get the new chief in place and give him a couple of weeks to settle in and figure out his job and not get him to have to do this the first day on the job. But I do think this fall, I would like to us look at ways to have community meetings, however those work on. I, as a school board member, will be happy to take a lead on that, on trying to figure out a way to do it. But I think this fall, doing it, and then we've got these 2 agreements, and we can go to the community and figure out if we need to stick with 2 different agreements, or if we can combine them into one and maybe come up with something that can work for all of us. So I hope that we can all move forward on this, but like I said, I'm very happy that we're starting school with this.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Mr. Watson?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I appreciate Superintendent Thomas and Ms. Bounds, your comment about bringing something to the community. Also want to just point out the fact we have an MOA. We do have something to bring to the community to start with. We don't need to make up something new to bring to the community to hear from them. And then also, I completely agree with having the incoming chief involved in this process. And I think I even referenced that in the beginning, that we were going to have a new chief, and they need to be at the table and fully engaged in whatever we do. Superintendent Thomas, have you had any conversation with the sheriff about, I mean, to me, these changes are fairly minute. They don't seem earth-shattering, but they do seem helpful. Have you had any conversation with the sheriff about, hey, would you be willing to, to shift in these four, relatively minor areas to have some consistency?
I have not talked to him yet, but if the board approves this MOA, then I'll certainly meet with the sheriff and say, here are some changes that
I
have
wouldn't
been
think there's
suggested.
anything controversial about the changes that have been recommended, so I think that would be worth a conversation.
Be glad to do that. And again, my frustration is not over time. My frustration, tell me what to do. If it's community meetings, we'll be glad. If you can't hire a facilitator, I get it. We'll be glad to put that together for you and help and do it. So, but just tell me what you want.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'll just make a couple of comments. I certainly agree with what's been said about the new chief being included in these conversations. And as Ms. Babb said, I think to get him here, I'm glad he's already met the sheriff and whoever Mr. Thomas said that he's already met. That's great. But I think that he needs to be here and in place so that he can be part of those conversations. And I think it's important to remember that we are elected by our communities to represent our communities. So I'm hopeful that each of our communities that elected us trust us to represent them. So I think that if board members feel like they need to hear from their specific district, that you should feel free to have a town hall anytime about any subject. So if something comes out of those meetings that needs to be addressed, that there are issues that are raised, that would be something to take to the superintendent and the chief. And so that's always an option of whatever the issue is, be it security or academics or whatever the issue is. So I think it's really important that the public understand that we are representing them and that they've elected us to represent them. So that's just my 2 cents for the day. Any other comments or questions? Okay, Ms. Babb, we'll move to public forum, please.
Okay, Maureen Shanick. Sorry. If you will come and give your name, county of residence, and 5 minutes you have to speak.
Thank you. My name is Maureen Shank, Knox County, and I'm here for your community input on the MOA. So there you go. I want to say thank you to Superintendent Thomas as well as Mayor Kincannon and KPD for reaching such a quick MOA. I mean, considering where we were in May. I'm a teacher in Knox County Schools, and we had very high level of anxiety, as you can imagine, this year. And to end the year with knowing that KPD officers might not be in our classrooms just increased that anxiety level, right? We are right now in an extremely violent environment with everything going on, not just in our community, but in our country. And I think it's important that we have KPD and recognizing the importance that the role that they play in our schools, in our community. I'm just so thrilled that we're going to have them back into our schools. I did have some questions regarding the roles and responsibilities in this MOA, and forgive me, I did not read the original MOA, so I really don't know if this is a change. But one of the roles, the role of the teacher, and I quoted, a role of the teacher is to respond to inappropriate and unlawful student behavior in a way that supports personal growth and learning opportunities for all students. I'm confused. I thought my role as a teacher, if I see unlawful or illegal student behavior, was to report that to the authority at the school, whether it's in administration or whether it is an SRO or an SSO, but that never appears in the MOA at all. Am I incorrect that that's my first role, is to report? So that was a little confusing. Second of all, the role of the SRO, and this goes back to what Mr. Watson was referring to about the role of SROs in regards to special education students. It says specifically in item 7 that SROs will not intervene with special education students without the specific request of a principal unless there is a chance of significant injury or loss of life. But the term significant injury has not been clearly defined, and you might think, well, that's kind of easy definition. Well, at my school, we have had teachers who've had broken bones because of problems with special education students. Was that considered significant injury? Is that enough to call in an SRO? We have occasionally, and more than occasionally, fights that occur in our school. If a fight, and as you know, those happen very quickly. It's very seldom that you have a pre-warning that a fight is going to occur. I mean, every once in a while, you know, they write it on the bathroom wall, but the rest of the time we don't know. So if a fight's happening in the hallway and it involves a special education student, does the SRO have the ability to jump in? Because face it, most middle school fights don't involve significant injury. If pulling hair or scratching or punching is not significant, what's the role of the SRO? And how are they to know if a student involved in an altercation in a hallway is indeed special education student? We're not walking around with IDs on our foreheads saying what we are. So I think those are a couple of areas that we, as a teacher, I would like to see clarified. I would really like to see a role as teachers clarified, because it does concern me. I think that's kind of vague language about supporting the personal growth and learning, and yet there doesn't seem to be anything about reporting. And also, you know, about the SRO and what their role is with special education students. I'm very up on the latest on de-escalation. I think that's critical. I think a lot of times you rush in and make the situation worse. So I think the focus on de-escalation is great. I am a little concerned about the case-by-case basis for infractions, because I think what that does is reduces a standard to an individual level. And when you do that, you open yourself up to being accused of bias. Because if one student creates an infraction and gets one penalty, and another student does the same infraction, gets a different penalty, how am I going to justify that? I can't do that in my classroom. So you have to have some kind of standard by which personal responsibilities and actions are ruled, and then perhaps taking into account special circumstances. But having no standard is not really the way to go either. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate you bringing up some concerns from a classroom perspective that we might not otherwise have thought of.
Thank you.
Tanya Coates. Please state your name and county of residence.
Thank you. Tanya Coates, Knox County. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the board, and Superintendent Thomas. I want to take this time to tell you that this will possibly be my last one speaking on behalf of the Knox County Education Association today, but I wanted to spend time of actually talking about the incoming president for the Knox County Education Association. We have made some inroads with the board, and we appreciate the collaborative efforts that we've had over the last 7 years. We've tried to make sure that you hear the voices of educators in your district, as well as the students in your district. And more importantly, that has been more evident, more than ever, is the parents in the community. But today I wanted to introduce to you Ms. Paula Hancock. She is a middle school teacher from Carnes Middle School. And I'm going to ask her if you can come stand up here beside me. But she has spent her career over 20 years in Knox County schools in support of all the students. She is a math teacher. So the difference between her is I talk a lot and she calculates a lot. So she will do us justice as educators in Knox County, that she will be representing all the educators of Knox County as our memorandum of understanding that still stays in place, that we represent all of our educators in Knox County, our professional educators in the classroom, and we're hoping that that I know that you will do her well because you've treated me so very well, and that she is here just to say thank you for accepting her. If you accept her without objection, if you would allow her to just say that in my 3 minutes left.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all. For some of you, I will be developing new relationships with, and for others, I've already had existing relationships with. I know I've had an opportunity to be chair since 2012 and to work on the Professional Educators Collaborative Conferencing Act with Mr. Thomas, and also Mr. Bolton and Mr. McPherson here, and newly, Dr. Riswick, as well as Ms. Kelly. So I'm looking forward to continuing our relationship as well as establishing new relationships with you all. So thank you so much for accepting me.
And that concludes my mouth running at this board meeting. Thank you so very much.
On behalf of the board, I'd like to say, Ms. Coates, it's been great to work with you, and I look forward to seeing you in the future in whatever new role you have, and I look forward to getting to know Ms. Hancock better and working with her.
Thank you very much. Okay, and we'll move to board forum. Ms. Christie, Mr. McMillan, Ms. Bounds, Ms. Henderson, Ms. Fab, Mr. Watson, Ms. Owen, anyone? Mr. Jen?
I guess I can say some things.
Okay.
I feel like I kind of mentioned this when I was at one of the previous work sessions, but you know, I look forward to working with all the members of this board and for this next year, and hopefully everything goes well and get some things done here.
All right. Thanks again. You made it through your first meeting, so. All right, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.